Introducing Baycell, a unique new kind of margarine.
I closed.
Dristan.
Good morning. I always try to be cheery on a Monday morning, but it's a little bit more difficult this Monday morning. It's been a bad weekend for law, order, and confidence in public officials. 3 people shot down in a pub. A Mountie slaughtered in his office in Richmond. RCMP out properly so, with tear gas and riot equipment to put down the most abominable display in Surrey at some big fancy party in some old wrecked house. And on top of that, it slips out over the weekend that for a long, long time, about 21 months, the Lionsgate Bridge, carrying 2 million cars a month, was on the verge of being very unsafe. Turns out that the north support on the Lionsgate Bridge had become twisted. I'm not surprised, because I was on that bridge the night of Hurricane Frida, and I watched it roll from end to end in the middle of the hurricane winds. Now we're told that they kept a very close eye on it while they repaired it secretly, and that if the winds had gone above 55 miles an hour, they would have closed it down. Alec Fraser, our dearly beloved Minister of Highways, not a bad guy in other ways, presently on a round-the-province junket with the Premier to pick up some political kudos, he hopes, says, oh, he didn't want to tell anybody about it because they might have become unnecessarily worried. Well, Alec, wherever you are on your BC Rail tour today with Premier Bennett, I just want to ask you one very simple little question, and I know you'll answer it when you get a chance. Are there any other bridges in the province of British Columbia which are presently being secretly repaired and which we will not be allowed to drive if the winds exceed 55 miles an hour? Obviously, you were sure, you must have been sure you weren't going to drop a couple of hundred people into the Narrows, but you might at least have given them an option. A bit of inconvenience is better than taking a gamble with people's lives. And as it stands now, Alec, God bless you. How's the second Narrows Bridge? It had a disaster, you know, and we had a full inquiry into it. And I presume the Lionsgate Bridge is all right now. But I'd certainly like to see you come on this program and give us the fullest possible assurances that we don't have to worry when we're driving over any bridge in British Columbia that secret repair work is being done without the public being warned. And I was going to start this morning some nice and pleasant. Anywho, I have a fair collection of people here this morning. On my right, on your left, I think, you will find the Honourable Jean-Jacques Blais, who presently he's got Goyer's old job. Remember Goyer? Supply and Services. Jean-Jacques, before that, was postmaster. Wonderful cabinet portfolio to have. The mail gets as far as Toronto from Europe, and there it stops. Solicitor General, remember when he used to stonewall about the Mounties? And of course, we good Canadians have forgotten all about the Mountie thing. The MacDonald Commission is buried and dead. What else was he? What else were you, Jean-Jacques?
Well, I think I came to where I'm at.
You closed the BC Pen.
Yeah, I had something to do with that.
Unbelievable decision to wipe out all that money in that good, secure centre piece of the BC Pen, which you could have converted into 2-bedroom apartments for our
Well, Mooney Evers is still hot to trot in order to get that piece of real estate to do exactly that.
And you've got all kinds of problems out of the new one, Kent, which I presume you authorised and built.
Oh, no, that was authorised and built before I came in, but the transfer took place. As a matter of fact, It was initiated after the Tories came into power.
Listen, this is just your plug. We'll get down to you in detail afterwards because he's got this new job, supplying services. He's the guy who dishes out the contracts regionally across the country, right?
Yes, sir.
After that, we're going to speak to one of my favourite people who is now been appointed. He, Enrico, let me get his name right. Enrico Diano, 40,000 a year, as the Cultural Heritage Advisor to British Columbia, following the federal government's lovely policy of multiculturalism, you know. Please everybody one at a time. Give them money to spend on kilts and bagpipes or whatever. And then I've got a woman reputed to be the most beautiful journalist and also one of the nastiest, sharpest women in the country, Barbara Emile, you know, Eastern Media Mafia, after the break. Jean-Jacques Blais is a very skilled political survivor. He's held a number of cabinet posts, and now he's in supply and services. I suppose I should first of all say it's nice to see a Liberal.
Well, it's nice to see you too, Jack.
And I've no doubt you'll be coming through here in droves in the next few months to convince us that all is well in the nation, that these provincial premiers are stupid, selfish and miserable, and that Pierre alone has the answer to national unity.
Not at all. We're here because we're administering programs that affect the whole of the country and that need to be brought to the public's attention, and that's why I'm here. As you know, I'm also responsible for Stats Canada, and I'll be visiting the Stats Canada office, one of our larger national offices.
Fascinated by that.
Well, I know, but it's an essential piece of public administration.
Well, just remember that you...
And we're going into the census as of the 3rd of June of 1981, and we want to encourage people, and as we know, to respond to the census requests.
And if I don't answer the questions, will I go to jail?
No, you won't go to jail, but hopefully people will reply to the questions and will fill the formula that they
Quite
receive.
Seriously,
Yeah.
Senator Perot, the only Liberal on the West Coast, unelected,
And
of course.
you did have 4 until 1979 in the cabinet, if you recall.
He announced a $4 billion program to help us in the West Coast the other day, and then had to back off. Are you aware of that gaffe?
Well, I remember his making a statement and the subsequent clarification by his staff. Yes.
In other words, it can't be made until the energy deal is made with Alberta. That was the clarification.
Well, let's wait for the budget.
Okay. You are responsible for all of the contracts and all of the money spent by the various departments in giving out the orders.
That's right. That's in movable goods. I spend about $3 billion a year.
Are you responsible for the $4 billion we're going to pay out for the 137 F-18s?
Yeah, that's mine.
Are you still going to buy it?
Of course. We've got a contract, and it's a good contract. It's a contract, Jack, that's going to bring us back nearly as much money as we spend out on those aircraft in industrial benefits.
Yeah, but how many people will it kill? The Perfect airplane crashed at Farnborough the other day. The U.S. Navy has grounded its 12. Have we got faith in the F-18?
Yes, we have faith in the F-18, and we ought to have faith in the F-18. When you're dealing with a developmental or an aircraft at a developmental stage, there are bound to be some mechanical problems, and this one here is no exception. If you recall, when we were developing our own CF-100, we used to pick up airmen throughout the country as a result of crashes. Now, this aircraft has only got one aircraft that has now been produced in terms of scheduled production. It's got 12 aircraft flying for testing purposes. You mean the one that crashed
at Farnborough?
No.
Was the Perfect one with the chief pilot on board?
Well, the chief pilot, test pilot, was in that aircraft, evidently because it had successfully performed at the Farnborough Air Show for nearly a week.
I'm not saying you're going to buy an aircraft that's dangerous, but there's been so much controversy about it. It's not the fastest, it's not, it's in some ways the best equipped. But I would say that by and large the country doesn't have much confidence in the purchase of the F-18 as of this moment.
Well, unfortunately,
you would
Jack,
agree?
No, I don't agree. Because, Jack, what happened with the F-18 is that there were a number of slow news days during the summer, and unfortunately it got some bad publicity.
You mean because it crashed at Farnborough?
Well, no, but it didn't crash until September, and during the whole of the summer, the news people the news media kept questioning the wisdom of that particular purchase.
Why
because
shouldn't they?
Well, because they had nothing to talk about.
Oh, come off it.
Oh,
We've
it's
always got the
terrible.
Liberals to talk about the Constitution and Bennett.
But, you know, in effect, Jack, that aircraft is a good aircraft. It's in a better state of development today, at this stage, than the F-15.
Are you responsible for the... You just hand out the money through the Defense Department. They okay everything.
No, we are involved in the okaying. People from my department were involved for 3 years in evaluating the 7 competitors for an aircraft, a jet aircraft for an
How much what? All right, to be parochial and payola-minded,
Yes.
which is often the case, certainly in Quebec and Ontario.
I don't like the word payola, but in any event.
Well, I mean allocation of contracts for regional satisfaction.
Sure.
How much of the F-18 $3 billion will we get in British Columbia?
Well, I'm advised by the air industry in British Columbia that they're pretty content that they will get as much as the industry will be able to bear.
In other words, we don't have anything really to bid for.
Oh, no, you've got a lot to bid for, and there are numbers being bid.
But we've got no major secondary industry. It'll all go to Ontario.
No, of course not. You've got major components of the Canadian air industry here in Vancouver. And I might point out to you that one of the reasons I'm here is because I'm addressing the Air Industries of Canada, the Air Industries Association of Canada here in Vancouver.
But are you actually going to take that $4 billion, or what's spent in Canada of the $4 billion, and share it out across the country on a pro rata basis?
Well, it'll be on a pro rata basis in the terms of the industry infrastructure which is available and what is able to be produced at any given time, and the success of the bidding by the domestic or the regional industry for the offset program.
Now, remember the big fuss during the last election? Remember how the Tories just muffed their chance to stay in power? We remember that pathetic thing, don't we?
Yes, I will remember it for a long time, Jack.
Right, because you thought you were in the wilderness for 20 years.
I didn't think 20 years, but I thought at least 18 months.
And Joe doesn't even withdraw the budget, and you waltz back in with your eastern base.
Well, yes, that's unfortunate.
I'm
not hiding that fact.
At that time, we had a great kerfuffle here over a little plant in Victoria called Trident. And Huntingdon, I think, refused them assistance from the federal government. And you people jumped in. Did you ever keep your promise to give them a subsidy?
Well, I understand. First of all, it's not within my department. That was a request that was made of Industry, Trade and Commerce. As I understand it, there was an infusion of both provincial and federal funds. The plant is still in operation. It's not doing very well. And hopefully they'll be able to market the goods. Because, you know, it's no use having an operation that is not able to market the product that it has developed. And when you look at some of the success stories we've got with Canadair and de Havilland, the same governments have been involved in supporting industries and developing the potential of those industries, and the profits are coming in. The de Havilland company has produced the Dash 7, and it's going now to be producing the Dash 8, which are competitive aircraft internationally.
How long have you been in this job now, Jean-Jacques
Since
Blais?
the 3rd of March.
3rd of March.
Yes.
How do you manage switching from portfolio to portfolio?
I enjoy it.
I suppose your mandarins just fill your ears with the department
Of course
line.
not. No, as a matter of fact...
Have you made any significant changes
Yes,
since you
sir.
became minister?
Major changes. I've introduced a number of policies that will foster the development of Canadian-based and Canadian-owned corporations. Such as the new profits policy that I'm announcing at lunch.
What's that?
That's a policy whereby we will develop the profits, or at least we're going to negotiate the profits afforded to the individual companies based upon a number of factors, including the risk that they take as a result of the contract negotiation.
I saw something about that the other day.
As well as the amount of Canadian value added that is put into the contract.
You're going to give them a tax break on that, is that it?
No, it's not a tax break. It's just that the percentage of profits that's going to be allowed to them is going to be greater depending on the amount of capital investment they put in, research and development.
You mean you're going to give them a cost-plus basis on government contracts, depending on the amount of Canadian, input into any product?
That's one of the factors, plus the amount of risk that they're ready to assume, the amount of research and development that they're ready to put in the development of new products and so on.
It is revolutionary. I mean, once not Tommy Douglas, who's the leader of the NDP? Broadbent.
Yeah.
Gets hold of you subsidizing big industry on a cost-plus basis to give them extra profits, he'll be mad.
Well, why should he? Why should he? That's the development of Canadian That's in instances where there is no competition in the marketplace. Another one that I've developed is the subcontracting opportunities program, where I'm saying to big companies who deal with me that they've got to go into the Canadian marketplace in order to subcontract for the goods that they're producing for me.
It may cost more, mind you, but it'll be done in Canada.
No. Because in effect, a lot of companies, because they're multinationals, go into the United States in order to subcontract because it's easier that way.
And
but
cheaper.
they've admitted, no, it's not cheaper. They've admitted to me that it's often and most times cheaper to provide their supplies from within Canada.
You can tell the aircraft people that. I'd rather talk politics with you. Do you mind?
Sure.
After the break.
Sure.
Jean-Jacques Blais is a Liberal MP from Nipissing, Ont, right?
That's right, Ontario.
In fact, we don't have a fully fledged English spokesman in the cabinet for the West, do we? Who's a senior English-speaking cabinet minister in the Liberals?
English speaking? I suppose it's Alan McEachern.
I suppose it is.
Yes, it is. Minister of Finance, Deputy Prime Minister, etc., etc.
Man who makes an instant mark on the nation's television every day when he mutters something about the budget. When is it coming down, the budget?
Well, he indicated something like 2 weeks next after we meet on the 15th of October. Or we may meet earlier than that.
You obviously won't answer this question, but I want people to know that I'll ask it anyway. You had your meeting with Trudeau, and you had your caucus meeting. And will you tell me what you've decided on patriating the Constitution?
In effect, there's an indication. There was an indication made by the President of the Privy Council that we may be recalling Parliament ahead of the 15th of October, and we would be dealing with patriation at that time.
What do you want to see done? I mean, you must tell your people in Nipissing what you want, your own personal view.
That's a matter that is still within cabinet confidence, and I can't discuss it now.
But I can ask you this question. Do you think that people in the West want to see a US-type constitution with our civil liberties hewn in a constitution?
Well, in effect, Jack, the question is that one, whether we can, in our institutions, entrench a Bill of Rights. And the fact is that in federal democracies, in order to make sure that there is secured rights that are identifiable both for the province and the federal jurisdictions, they have to be entrenched. It seems to me illogical to assume that somehow human rights can be of one type as they affect the provincial jurisdiction and of another type as they affect the federal jurisdiction.
You're confusing
they must be the same.
My somewhat simple question. Freedom of speech.
Yes.
Freedom from harassment by the police.
Yes.
Freedom of religion. Freedom of conscience and all the rest of it. Do you think that should be in a US-type constitution for the country? People's rights.
My belief?
Yeah.
Yes. I strongly believe that in a federal system where you've got two levels of parliamentary institutions, the provincial and the federal, that in order for those rights to be protected to the ultimate degree by all levels of government, you've got to have them codified and entrenched in a constitution and unassailable by either one or the other level of
Now let me go a step further. You're obviously in favor of a US-type constitution.
Or an Australian type of constitution, or any constitution that has...
In other words, you want to drop the English duality of this country in common law.
No, in effect,
In other words, my freedoms, I've got every freedom in the world until it's proven that I haven't got these freedoms right now.
Until the legislatures remove those freedoms, as they can.
But I can always remove the legislatures. Do I want...
No, you can't.
Do I want a constitution run by 7 or 9 or 11 judges who will interpret my rights?
That isn't the case. The legislation, the rights themselves will be legislated upon in concert between the levels of government, and that's how it will be.
I'm talking about simple things like the common law of the criminal code. Yes, it is.
Yes, the common law, the criminal code is not the common law. The criminal code is a codification
my basic
of the common law principles.
I'd rather have the legislatures change my rights than 9 or 10 judges in a court which down the road 50 years may be packed.
I know, but the fact is that The province of Alberta may change it in one way, the province of British Columbia in another way, the province of Newfoundland in another way, with absolutely no consistency in between each. And it seems to me that human rights are something that transcend the abilities of individual legislatures to deal with.
The more law, the less human rights.
That is not the case at all. You know as well as I do that if we didn't have a legal system and the rule of law in this country,
that's a different
your
thing
rights, well, no,
from
it is
putting it
not.
in a constitution to be interpreted by judges.
But the fact is that the legislatures now can interfere with the rule of law. They can, in effect, abrogate your rights simply by passing a law within their own domain.
I don't like this.
And they've done that in the past.
US-type constitution. You
Well,
would keep them. You would keep the links with the Commonwealth, wouldn't you?
Of course, but the fact is it has nothing to do with the Commonwealth. It has nothing to do
It's
with the
got
monarchy.
something to do with English traditions.
No, England is a unitary state. There is no division of sovereignty or jurisdiction. You don't have provincial jurisdictions and federal jurisdictions.
As far as basic rights
It's
are
like
concerned,
apples and oranges,
there is
and
no
you know as
division
well.
in this country either when it comes to... I'm not talking about the entrenchment of French or minority language
I
rights.
suggest to you that if in Great Britain the separation or the autonomy that Scotland wanted had evolved so that they would have had a parliament that could have legislated in ex equo with the British Parliament, they would have of necessity put in their human rights within their constitution.
As a matter of fact,
And as
for
a
your
matter-
information, Jean-Jacques Blay, one, Scotland didn't want it, and secondly, Scottish common law is vastly different as it is now from English
Well,
common
the
law.
fact is that since Great Britain has joined the common market, they are now being subjected to the human rights code of the
Well,
common
can I
market.
leave the message with you that we're suspicious?
Why should you be suspicious?
Because we've no representation in the West from your Liberal government. We didn't want it anyway at the last election. We toughed you out.
Well, that
And
could
we are
change.
suspicious.
That will change.
We are suspicious of creeping
Why?
republicanism and other things emanating from the East.
But there's nothing Republican about a Bill of Rights. You're talking about classical dogma. The fact is that we've got a constitutional monarchy. We'll continue to have a constitutional monarchy with our institutions being based on British precedent. The necessity of the entrenchment of a Bill of Rights is brought forward as a result of there being two levels of jurisdiction, the federal and the provincial. And you have to have some standards. You've got to have some commonality throughout this country.
Well, I'd certainly go for the entrenchment of rights of minorities in Quebec and in the West where numbers weren't. That would be easy enough to do. You wouldn't get any argument on that. But why don't you just bring back the Constitution as is, without change?
Well, I think we need you ought also to have an amending formula. We're not going to go through this rigmarole for another 50 years as to what sort of formula should we have in order to change the rules of the game. You can't have that.
Mr. Jean-Jacques Blay, as long as Quebec is quiescent, it doesn't really matter, does it?
Oh, yes, it does. Quite to the contrary, because in effect, there is a demand for strong, dynamic leadership at the center.
There certainly is.
Yes,
We
in
haven't
effect,
got it.
Oh, yes, you're getting it now.
Oh.
You're getting it now.
Oh.
And
Anyway.
you're not very persuasive, Jack. You haven't persuaded me that your point of view is
I
the
couldn't
right one.
persuade you. You're a brainwashed liberal.
Oh, come on now. I'm a liberal free thinker as you are, and I view my opinions are
Listen,
based upon rational
as a
thought.
liberal free thinker, you're absolutely bleeding delighted that all of the scandals in the RCMP have been successfully buried.
They're not
When are we
very-
going to get the McDonald Commission
they should
report?
be coming out. I thought they'd be coming out in July.
Will they be
And
out in time for the next election?
You'll have to ask Mr. Justice McDonald, but I'm sure it'll be out before the end of the end of this year.
Jean-Jacques Blay, Solicitor General, to be parochial and selfish, would you please leave lots of money behind in poor, impoverished British Columbia?
Impoverished British Columbia. I love British Columbia, and you've got the future by the tail.
No doubt
You ought
about
not
that.
to be worried. The confidence
We're
is
not
just
worried.
self-evident, and notwithstanding the Lion Gates Bridge.
It's only our politicians who worry us. The country will survive despite them.
Well, I don't blame you in terms of your own provincial politicians.
Or our federal politicians.
Not at all.
My thanks to Jean-Jacques Blay. Next, we're going to have a little nag at a man who's been appointed to a $39,000 a year job by the provincial government on multiculturalism. My thanks to Jean-Jacques Blay. Next, Enrico Diano. Buongiorno, Enrico Diano.
Thank you very much.
Tell me,
That is
Enrico,
correct now.
what's
It's
the...
not Diano, it's Diano.
Diano, okay. What's this job you've got?
Well, it is Cultural Heritage Advisor. This is for British Columbia. It's provincial. It's not
To
federal.
whom?
Well, it is to the Minister of Evan Wolf. So, you know.
Finance minister or something?
No, he's not a finance minister. He's a provincial secretary.
Oh yeah, provincial secretary. He was moved out of the finance ministry to provincial secretary.
That's right.
And you are the multiculturalism heritage advisor for the provincial government.
Yes.
How much?
Well, $39,000.
$39,000 a year.
Fringe benefits.
What were you doing before that?
Well, I was a member of the Canadian Consultative Council of Multiculturalism. That is the federal body, the advisory body to the Ministry of Multiculturalism.
That wasn't a paid job?
No.
Just per diem?
That's right, per diem. I was the chairman for British Columbia. I was the co-chairman on a national basis of a committee for equal opportunities, and I was on the executive committee. So
Didn't you say when you were appointed that you were surprised because you didn't know much about multiculturalism?
I don't think so. Actually, I think that, quite frankly, the choice is very wise from the government, because my participation at the federal level has been very intense. And moving through the country from Yellowknife to Quebec City to St. John's to Montreal to Toronto, and having public meetings and listening to the communities, and then having meetings and meetings and meetings, I would like to say that I am the guy that is really updated about what is happening now in Canada.
Well, that quote in the paper about you being surprised to get the job was wrong, was it?
No, I think that is a wrong quotation there. I don't think it's a surprise at all.
Have you had?
I'm very pleased.
Have you had a lack of
highly
support?
honored.
Have you had a lack of support from the Italian community?
I don't think so.
Some of whom have been protesting your appointment because they were not consulted. Disappointment is shared by the majority of the different ethnic groups in Vancouver. They were not consulted or asked for their recommendations. And they don't seem to think much of your activity in multiculturalism.
Well, okay, Jack. Let's make it straight on this. You see, there are always some individuals that are not very happy about anything at all. But I've been receiving a lot of support from so many communities. What has been happening here is that in 1979, there's been a conference about multiculturalism toward the provincial policy. And this conference has been putting together a series of recommendations. And basically, the community in general, I would like to say some people in the ethnocultural communities, have been expecting that these recommendations were going to be fulfilled, you know, just in the particulars. Now, it is necessary to keep in mind that these recommendations were basically the copy of the federal type of structure that exists now in multiculturalism in Canada.
Which is give money to ethnic groups to put on little folk festivals and encourage their language and their heritage. Isn't that right? Isn't that what the federal government does?
In part does, yes. I see the national policy for multiculturalism is for all Canadians.
But what's wrong with people like me? I come from a different cultural background. Yes. I come from a place where they all wear their kilts, have a bottle of whiskey in their hip pocket and get drunk on Saturday nights. Right. Now, I think most of us, although we may be a little different, not superior but different, came out here to become Canadians.
Exactly.
And if we want to have our bagpipe bands, we should pay for them ourselves and do them ourselves. We don't need a government. Don't you think it's wrong that the government should be in this fomenting ethnic divisions?
Not at all.
The Greeks and the Italians and the Chinese and the East Indians and whoever else there is.
If you think that that is a division, you are right. Yeah. But I don't think that is a division.
Think it should be subsidized by the taxpayer?
Well, it is your culture, Jack. And I think that if you'd like to have the freedom to prosper in that culture, in this freedom in this country, I think there is nothing wrong about that.
But I don't need government money for it.
We are all Canadians.
That's right. That's the point I'm making.
And the policy that we have is for all Canadians. In this particular case, my job is going to be for all British Columbians. And this is very important to keep in mind, because you see, what they were asking for... You're going to tell
me about my Scotch cultural background and help me on it if I want help?
I don't think that I will, but I think that there are a lot of people that are very familiar with your culture, that they are very knowledgeable about your culture.
Enrico.
And they can give you as much as you would like to in relation.
Enrico, I know enough about my culture that makes me throw up sometimes. But Enrico, there must be lots of people like me who don't want to see the government in the multicultural business at all. And it disappoints me to see Social Credit trying to curry a little favour with ethnic groups, because you and I know how important block voting is in federal and provincial elections by ethnic group, don't you?
Jack, I think we are all Canadians.
But don't we know how important bloc voting is?
We must all participate in our democratic system.
You're not going to answer my question.
From the political point of view, we should be all very active participants in our democratic system.
You were a Tory,
we are all voting.
Your politics are conservative.
Yes.
So federally. No, I'm just pointing it out. Federal conservative, provincial social credit.
Yeah.
That's right.
I would like to say that provincial social credit have never been giving really any kind of specific participation in that side.
No, but I mean, many Tories vote Tory nationally and naturally.
But Jack, it is worth to keep in mind that in British Columbia, over 45% of this population here has an ethnic background that is outside of the English people. That in Canada, there has been an evolution. You see, it is called mosaic. I like to call it kaleidoscope because there is an evolution that goes on. You know, at the time of the Confederation, we are talking about this Confederation continuously here. At the time of the Confederation, 1871, there was 61% English, 31% French, and only 8% were considered others. That is basically the totality of outside these two major cultures. Well, you know, it's about one-third, and one-third now. And in the future, the statistics are saying that in the 2000s, it's going to be about 55% of the total population in this country is going to be from ethnic backgrounds outside the English and the French Canadians. Do you think that these people are Canadians? Do you think that these people should be participating in the Canadian life?
As Canadians.
Well, that's fine.
As
Canadians.
Canadians.
What we are looking for. This is where we are going
I think we all came here not to encourage our ethnic background, to keep in touch with it, but to become Canadians. And take the mix as it comes.
This is what we are trying to do.
I don't know that you people help.
What do you mean? Well, you see, this is what is your interpretation about the multiculturalism? This is the thing.
Well, do you want my interpretation? I'll give you. The federal government set up multiculturalism as a way to encourage, with taxpayers' money, divisions across the country so they could keep a handle on them. To keep them happy under the government in power in Ottawa. That's my brutal interpretation of multiculturalism.
That I think is completely wrong, because you have been using a word there, division, that is completely against all the concept of unity in this country. If I want to go to we are for Canadians. We said just now, you said that we are for Canadians, and we are going to be for all Canadians.
I'm wrong, of course. I want a melded Canadian. I want a homogenous Canadian. I realize that was...
It's not possible to have that. Look at the realities around you.
What do you mean it's not possible?
Look what we are all about. I am what I am, you are what we are.
All we need is a bit of intermarriage and we have a melded Canadian.
Maybe with the future, maybe, I don't know, 100 years, 200 years from now, you are going to have some kind of difference, an evolution in all this.
I wish you well, as long as no tax money is spent on multiculturalism.
I think that your interpretation of multiculturalism is completely erroneous, and I think that it should be ratified there, because I think that multiculturalism is the realities as they are in this country.
And we are going to be political realities.
We are going to be all Canadians, and in particular in British Columbia, our main goal, our main objective is to be Canadians in British Columbia, and this is what we are going here for.
Enrico, Diano, and myself are totally agreed that we all hope to become good, solid Canadians.
Right.
We merely differ in the way it should be done. I think we should let cultural groups do their own heritage finding, and those who don't, like myself, very quickly become homogenous Canadians. Easier, mind you, with a Scotch background and no appreciable language trouble than somebody off a boat from Vietnam, I'll agree. I wish you well, but don't...
From so many other countries, Jack.
Don't spend too much...
We are all good human beings, we are all good Canadians, and we are all together in this land that is a very prosperous land. And what we strongly believe, this country is not only for natural resources, is not only for the beauty, it is for the human side.
And the people.
That's right.
I'm with you all the way.
Canadians.
I wish you well, but don't spend too much of our tax money.
Thank you.
Next, Barbara Emile, who probably regard me as some kind of horrible creature now because she is a liberal. And she's going to confess to us this morning after the break. Despite my smart aleck remarks at the beginning of the program, Barbara Emile is a respected author and journalist. Maclean's Magazine. I was a bit on the snappy side. I thought at first she was a woman's libber, now I think she's an anti-feminist. I first came across her work, apart from Maclean's, a magazine that I do not like, a magazine which I do not regard to be a great success as a Canadian news magazine, in a book written by by Barbara Amiel, By Persons Unknown, which was on the sentencing for murder of a man called Demeter.
Peter Demeter.
Peter Demeter, who allegedly was proven to have murdered his wife.
To have hired persons or persons unknown to have murdered his wife, Christine.
And through that book it came a thread of your unhappiness with the Canadian criminal justice system.
Yes, yes.
Is that so?
Yes, and multiculturalism, curiously enough, since you were just sniping away at that.
Tell me, are we going to agree on multiculturalism or not? Am I taking a WASP, smug, Scotch background look and denying other people the chance of getting federal money to build up their ethnic groups? Am I being unfair?
I would never have thought of you as a WASP, Jack. I always thought of WASPs as rather anemic, with rather thin, lanky bodies and three-piece suits. You don't fit my idea of a WASP at all.
And my background isn't that of a WASP either.
You don't speak like one. That's the problem. I've tried all my life to speak like one. It's very unsuccessful because I'm a mongrel too. But the question of multiculturalism, I think, is absolutely fundamental to this country, and we'll agree on it, simply because I think that it would take a blind, deaf and dumb man to assume that the government funding of people's roots, making roots a matter of public policy rather than of private policy, is a deliberate attempt to fragment the country, to offset the French minority in Quebec, to give the government power base, as much as the Democratic Party did in the United States. You get your assured votes, you get your Ukrainian vote, you get your Italian vote, you get patronage. And too bad that in the end the country dies over it. Too bad that the hostilities of the old world are brought into Canada. I talk about it in the book, and I talk about it with much unhappiness.
Well, this is the book. I don't know if they've seen it yet or not. They have. Confessions. They've seen that book.
Yeah.
You see, I remember once being told by one MP in opposition, it was Ron Huntingdon, who was a very outspoken right-wing Tory from the West Coast here, who had a brief moment of glory when they were in power for 5 minutes. And he's the only politician who's ever laid it on the line to me that there are 27 ridings, this was in the last election, in this country which control the government and which are, in his view, dependent on ethnic bloc voting.
Absolutely.
And from that, I take my line with Enrico, who's a nice guy. Nothing wrong with Enrico Diano.
Do you think he actually believes what he says? I mean, it's quite extraordinary. The people who are in the business of dividing the country wear this sanctimonious face and this sanctimonious smile and talk with hand on heart about unity. You see, you talk about power blocks and votes. That's the trees. That's the practical side of why you have multiculturalism. What I'm concerned with is the philosophical side of it and the results, the end results. And the end results, which are much more dangerous than simply seats in Parliament, are a social fabric stretched to breaking point. They're one group against another group. They're the Serbs against the Croatians. They're the East Indians against the blacks. There's this whole kind of stretching of the social fabric. And by God, it's done on taxpayers' money, and it's done at the government's instigation. And I think that the more malevolent aspect of it and the more hideous question is, why does the government, not only for power reasons, want to keep this country in a state of internal strife? Why are they trying to destroy the strength and unity of Canada? I think there are two answers, and one of them is much more frightening than the simple answer of wanting to remain in power.
Mind you, you're a much more cynical Canadian than even I am, because as I recall this book, I just can't get the quote on it. You say at one stage, that you give the impression at one stage that you're so unhappy that you would leave this country in a flash because of your unhappiness with it.
No, it's not quite that, Jack. What I essentially say is that I'm not a nationalist in the old sense. I'm a wandering Jew. And that my allegiance is not to a group of trees or a rock, much as I love this country and its scenery. My allegiance isn't to a lake or to a geography. It is to a set of ideas and a philosophy. And as long as this country stands for free enterprise and liberty, then it has my allegiance, it has my life. But my suitcase is packed, because if in fact it is going to sell out free enterprise and sell out liberty, then I have allegiance only to that idea, and I will move on.
Well, why don't you pack your case now? Because free enterprise is down the tube in this country.
I guess because I'm a fighter, because I think Canada is a smashing place. You know, if you come from Europe, it has a lot of old buildings and a lot of lovely ideas, but nothing beats the
But,
Canadian.
you know, this book is well worth reading because of the change in you. You started out in an affluent Jewish family. Then you had family troubles, and you run off and you do all the humiliating little thing to give yourself a working-class roots background, don't
Well, I didn't
you?
do it deliberately, Jack. I mean, one doesn't, in fact, embrace bread and dripping instead of caviar and salmon.
By choice.
Voluntarily, exactly.
And then from there you managed to slide your way into the media glib-libs, as you call them,
I wouldn't say slide, I'd say work my behind off, but yes.
in the CBC.
Yes,
for
even
which
in
you
the
have,
CBC.
For which you have developed an astonishing scorn.
I don't think astonishing. Scorn, yes.
I mean, astonishing is an adjective, not astonishing in your eyes. A considerable scorn.
Yes.
What's wrong with the CBC these days? Mind you, you're only talking about the Eastern Media Mafia.
You know, being from the East is not like having syphilis.
Well,
there are
I don't
some
know.
good things in the East.
I'm not quite so sure about that, because the way they run the national news out of
True,
Ottawa
it
and
is
Toronto, you would think we had the social disease.
It is a dangerous social disease, and it is probably contagious given what it's doing to the characters of the people in this country. The reason I have unhappiness with the CBC and what is wrong with it, I guess what is wrong with it is that through a very understandable set of circumstances, everybody there believes very comfortably in the same thing.
What is that? Tell me what is the unspoken policy of the CBC with which you were so familiar for so long?
Not remotely unspoken, spoken loud and clear.
What
it
is it?
left-wing, sentimental socialism.
Left-wing social democracy.
Yes.
Gay rights. You make a point of that in your book. Don't back off now.
I wouldn't say gay rights. I would say certainly radical feminism, a kind of misty-eyed embracing of everything that is third world, a feeling that income redistribution is what the country is all about. That
Native rights.
That the evils
Love
of the world...
Tom Berger.
Love Tom Berger, indeed. That the evils of the world can all be put down to capitalism and multinational corporations. A very simplistic kind of underdog mentality, except what they don't understand is that those aren't the underdogs anymore. And it's a sad thing because, you see, there are some very talented people at the CBC. There are talented producers. There are talented
I thought there was
story
only
editors.
Patrick Watson and nobody else.
Patrick Watson's a very interesting
Yeah, I know.
example of a man with considerable talent.
Undoubted.
Great skill, who could make the telephone book interesting if he read it, and sometimes is saying just as much as what the telephone book says, and is making it that interesting. But his ideas are the classic left-wing socialism ideas as well, packaged very nicely, and by God, we need people from the left. I'd be standing here screaming if the CBC had been taken over by the right. The problem is that they keep out everyone of an alternate opinion. Or they do one other thing, which is even worse. They get the little token conservative on, and they say, see, we are being fair. See, we are giving the other side of the opinion, and they're not.
I cannot think of any program on CBC at this moment, or CTV, on which anyone exerts strong opinions.
Strong opinions are anathema in Canada. You know what they say if you have strong opinions? They write letters and they say things like, you should be on an open line show, as if somehow having strong opinions is consistent with the lowest common denominator in broadcasting.
Oh, I know.
There is an enormous fear in this country of having an opinion, unless it's the party line opinion.
Well, I could do the job out of Ottawa any moment for any government by standing up and saying, the government today introduced legislation to make everybody 3'6" in height. And the intention of that legislation is so-and-so. Then you pat at the line. Then you
Frankly,
take a
Jack,
break.
I think you're to blame in one way.
Blame me after the break. Barbara Emile, author of Confessions, etc., etc. If you'll excuse me for a moment, I have a little piece of local business to which I must attend. Steve, are you there?
Yes, I am, Jack.
Oh, you're right through my ear, as a matter of fact. Count up to 10 and we'll see how you sound. Steve?
Oh, yeah. I'm here, Jack.
Bit of an echo on it, but it'll do.
Okay.
Now, I understand that the new Chief Constable of Vancouver, to nobody's surprise, is Deputy Chief Bob Stewart.
That's right, Jack.
When is the announcement made?
It will be made in about 5 minutes from now. They're just about to enter a press conference.
So they wasted their time by going through a so-called selection period. Is that correct?
That's true, Jack.
Tell me what the handout says. Well, first of all, I'll explain to Barbara what happened here. The other day, the chief constable resigned. 50, gave lots of notice. And then the chairman of the police board announced that the selection of the new chief would be made exclusively from within the Vancouver force. So I go down and see the mayor, this wonderful fellow Volrich, and I say to him, are you telling me that you're going to get the best possible chief from the Vancouver force and you're not going to get the best possible chief from throughout the entire country? And he said, that's correct. In other words, I said to him, no RCMP officers, for instance, need apply. He said, that's correct. They'd obviously handpicked Stuart. Now, I've nothing against Stuart at all. I'm sure Stuart will be an excellent police constable, but he will always have the feeling that he was not picked from a countrywide competition, but handpicked by the Vancouver Police Board in denial of complete freedom of selection all across the country. What does the handout say about it?
There's one quote here, Jack, that says, when Chief Winterton announced his desire to retire, we as a board, meaning the police board, had been so impressed with Deputy Stewart's abilities and overall qualifications that the board gave serious consideration to immediately appoint him as Chief Winterton's successor. However, the board felt every officer on the force should be given the opportunity of applying for the position. The mayor goes on to point out...
In other words, they'd handpicked him and they were going to give it straight to him, but they decided to extend it to the other 20 officers who had time to apply but weren't really considered.
That's right, and the mayor points out...
Well, that's good for morale.
He points out later, Jack, that he wants everyone to know that only one application was received. It came from Bob Stewart, which is a tribute, the mayor says, to Bob, who quite obviously has the respect and support from the senior officers.
Either that or the others felt it was useless applying for the job.
That's right. It's interesting now, Jack, to note that 2 deputy positions are open now, to which they are opening applications.
Oh. Steve, thanks for confirming my lack of faith in the system.
All right, Jack.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I don't know why I bothered to point out these little things. I just felt it was wrong that the Vancouver Police Board should not extend the competition all across the country, at least to make it look good.
You bother because you have a very old-fashioned idea of right and wrong, words which are no longer used in politics, in policy, or in decision-making.
Right.
You're a dying breed, Jack.
For the purpose of editing, we shall now start this segment of the interview again after a 3-second delay. Barbara Emile, you were telling me that I am to blame for some of this malaise which afflicts the media.
Yes, because you sit here in your own malaise in Vancouver when I know perfectly well that you have been offered network cross-country exposure, which would at least do something to balance the monopoly of the media by the left wing. And you sit here very comfortably in Vancouver, can't blame you, refusing to go live on network. Now, since there are so few people who have that opportunity, who are given that offer of your view and your persuasion, I think that you have a responsibility, in fact, to make your views known across the country.
Go jump in the lake.
Oh, but I've been told that so often, Jack, you'll have to say something much worse.
Are you telling me that there's only one Webster-type commentator available across this country? Don't be silly. I mean, Pierre Berton in his day could have done it, but he's doing so many things and he doesn't like to do the pedestrian daily
Pierre
jobs
Berton is a
anyway.
social democrat. Fine, respectable position to take, but simply one of 3 dozen that we already have on the network.
I am a left-winger by definition, rapidly moving to the right, however.
You may be a classic liberal.
I never thought of that. I'm not a liberal. I want you to get that quite clear.
That's a capital L liberal,
Yeah.
but they're not liberals either. The capital L liberals in this country are, in fact, social democrats, well on their way to scientific socialism if they get a chance. They're going to regulate you to death, Jack.
All right, let's get some annoying stuff from you now, from your book. Bare your chest on how you rigged Trudeau's election.
I beg your pardon, it's just that I'm not quite used to these phrases.
Well, this is what you call a topless show. Sometimes people's heads get taken off.
If it will help the cause of freedom, I'm delighted
Please,
it's true.
misunderstand. I'm not blushing. I blush so easily, it's appalling. Next thing. Tell the story of how you rigged the poll on Pierre Trudeau and may have played a not insignificant part in his election as leader in 1968.
Cruel, cruel. It is true that I rigged the CBC poll. I was a story editor on the CBC Sunday night primetime show. And I had a very keen producer by the name of Peter Herendorf, a first-rate producer who is now the second man in charge at the CBC. And they had a terrific idea. We were going to go on air right before the Liberal Leadership Convention. And what they wanted to do was call up every delegate to the Leadership Convention, find out how they were going to vote, and announce on CBC Network who the next leader of the Liberal Party was going to be before the convention began. And they put me in charge of it, a deadly mistake. I started organizing our researchers to call everybody up, and we telephoned and telephoned, but quite rightly, the delegates refused to tell us who they were going to vote for. This was not good enough for my producer, Peter Herrendorf, a man of some determination, and he came to me in my office and said, "Emil, you can do it." Now, I knew that he'd had a lot of expensive electronic equipment installed in the CBC studios so that the computers would light up and flash who the next leader was going to be, and that if I didn't come up with a name, his head was going to be on a platter for that expensive equipment, or my head. And I kind of thought that given the choice between his head and my head, it was going to be my head.
Right.
So I sat down and decided that the only way out of this situation was to make up the votes, because no one was going to tell us. And I tried to think how I could get away with a lie, and it occurred to me that if you give people the lie they want to hear, they won't check into it. And the lie that everybody wanted to hear at that time was that Pierre Elliott Trudeau was going to win. He was trendy. He wore turtleneck sweaters. He talked about keeping the state out of the bedrooms of the nation.
He was going to decriminalize marijuana.
Never mentioning that the state was going to go into every other room in the house.
Right.
He was going to decriminalize marijuana. He was swinging. He was a bachelor. God knows he might be doing it with beached whales. It was a marvelous thing to have this kind of liberation. And so I wrote down in our forms that Pierre Elliott Trudeau was going to win the nomination. The producer was delighted. I have no idea whether he was a confirmed Liberal or not. That wasn't the point. He wanted Trudeau. And CBC announced to the nation on Sunday night that Pierre Elliott Trudeau was going to win the Liberal leadership campaign. Now, all the other delegates, all the other contenders rather, screamed like crazy. And a memo came down from head office saying, "Would you please explain how you arrived at this decision?" But by the time the memo came from Ottawa to Toronto, given internal mail as well as external mail, Pierre Elliott Trudeau had been elected, and there wasn't a Liberal in sight who wasn't willing to say that they had voted for him. I don't feel, and I think it's cruel of you, because in fact I have agonized over this, it was a reprehensible thing to do.
It was.
It showed a kind of character flaw that I suppose I wear a hair shirt for
How old
now.
were you at the time? 10 years, 12 years ago?
I was 26.
You hadn't been in the
I'm
business
39
that long.
now, but I was 26 the way it felt.
You've been in the business, what, 6 years?
I was old enough to know better. I'd been in the business long enough to know better. There was no excuse. It was based on what our politicians base things on now. Expediency,
If you'd handled
pragmatism,
that
and my
properly in Ontario political circles, you could have become a senator.
own- Oh, I know.
That is a cruel remark. But you know, it makes one to shudder, and I've never been as guilty of anything such as you have done. But I've no doubt that I've pushed my own prejudices on occasions and caused a change in things which might not have come around. But you were just being an opportunist.
I was just being an
Or
opportunist.
perhaps you sensed the thing correctly. Perhaps
Yes.
your poll would have been right had it been honest.
Well, of course, if it had been honest, it probably would have shown Pierre Elliott Trudeau as well.
Winters. Winters? Winters.
Ah, wishful thinking, Jack. But I put my finger in my mouth, held it
No,
up to
I
the
hated
wind.
Winters. I didn't like Winters. In those days, I regarded him as a... he came from Brinko and Churchill Falls, and he was Bay Street capitalism of the highest order. We looked very suspiciously at this man Trudeau in those days, and my first couple of press conferences I had with him when he was Minister of Justice were total and absolute disasters.
It is an absolute wonder to me how the Canadian people have swallowed the really anti-democratic things that Trudeau has said and continue to re-elect him.
How tough will I be? Just watch me. After the break. Coffee's cold. See this new cup? It makes cold coffee. There's somebody here who makes coffee
That's
with
progress for you.
cold water. Some person made it.
Yes,
Give me
a
your
coffee person.
Give me your CBC line on that, please.
Well, there was a memo that came out from the CBC about a month, maybe 2 months ago, from the office of Al Johnson, the president of the CBC. And it appears that the radical feminists have taken over the CBC, because the memo was a directive to all producers, all creative people, on how they were now to portray women in CBC News, Variety, Drama, Public Affairs. You can no longer use certain words in CBC. You can't use mankind, because that's a sexist word. You can't use man-made. You cannot portray women according to their physical attributes, nor men according to their professional ones, whatever the hell that means. I think, as I said in the column, that it means that if you see a woman in a tight sweater on CBC, and chances are you won't anymore, you have to show a man blow-drying his hair in the same scene. What is really behind it, I think...
It's frightening.
It is frightening, because you see...
Is this to de-sex the whole nation?
You see, it is an insult to women. I happen to be a feminist. I want equal pay for the same job. I don't want a job denied to me because I am a woman. But I don't want to feel humiliated and made to feel that equality depends on me hiding my sexual identity. I take a great deal of pride in my gender. I think, like millions of women and men in Canada, we enjoy our differences. Those differences tend to be harmless, often quite enjoyable, and are a sense of pride to us. But the CBC, who has been taken over by this group of radical feminists who apparently have cornered Al Johnson so that he is issuing these idiotic studies, appointing vice chairman or something in charge of the portrayal of women, and otherwise squandering
Why don't we call them
needed
things?
money.
Vice chair things.
Vice chair things?
Vice chair things instead of vice chairpersons.
I'll tell you why you won't.
Canada thing power.
Because the women's feminist movement at the University of Toronto, the women's commissioner there, just had a statement printed in which she said in the U of T newspaper that she wished she could see Barbara Amiel smeared in an article. Smeared. Now that's one sister to another sister. Not I wish I could see her debated, not I wish I could see her arguments attacked, but smeared, which is a word that means, as far as I know, distorted,
That's right.
A below-the-belt thing.
Slandered, maligned, destroyed.
These professional women's movement people, that whole industry, has a kind of fascist overtone. Our opinion, right or wrong attitude. There is no free play, and I think that's probably why the government embraces it.
It's the old radical militant union technique. If you're not with them, you're a fascist.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you're not with them, you're a fascist, I suppose.
But isn't that the attitude right across Canada on so many things now?
I don't think it permeates nearly so badly as in the media, for instance.
No.
Another thing that concerns me a little bit, the time that the Mayor of Toronto made these unfortunate remarks, or fortunate remarks, I forget the circumstances now, about homosexuals. And suddenly you begin to see coverage out of CBC Toronto, and I remember this specifically, which made me think, are there any straight people in Toronto?
There
began to look like San Francisco, where there are 177,000 gays, registered voters, who run that city, and where they've got the media in a total bind. Now, I object to any kind of misrepresentation of numbers, whether it's about criminals, drugs, or sexual preferences. Because television is so damnably powerful. You can make the people in Pouce Coupé think, my God, we're being terribly unfair to all kinds of people to whom we perhaps should be terribly unfair.
It is true that there does, if you read the literature of our land and watch the television, appear to be a severe shortage of those of heterosexual inclinations. And certainly the talk in the women's clubs these days is of the severe shortage of people of heterosexual inclinations. But
maybe it's just a fad. Maybe it's a pretend.
Of course, you see, what it is, in fact, is a preoccupation with trends. And I personally, as I have said on numerous occasions, really don't care if people do it with men, women, or the proverbial beached whales. That's a personal decision.
As long, who was it that said, you may do what, was it Campbell? George Bernard Shaw's correspondent, Mrs. Dorothy Campbell, who said, doesn't really matter what you do, you may do it in the streets as long as you don't frighten the horses.
Yes.
Mrs.
Or possibly
Patrick Campbell.
do it with the horses.
Mrs. Patrick Campbell.
The problem becomes when people try to legislate their sexual preferences or their lifestyles or their ambitions into a piece of law, when, in fact, homosexual rights become not the freedom to do what you want to do in the privacy of your own life, but become a restriction on me. It is therefore impossible for me, if a flaming gay walks into my house and wishes to sublet an apartment building I have, it is impossible for me to say no. Now, I think I'm stupid if I say that, because why should I care?
No,
I want the
you
right
can
to
say
be
no.
stupid.
As long as you don't say no, you're not getting it because you're a flaming gay. You can say no, providing you give no reason and have your lawyers at your side.
But you see, once in fact you have homosexual rights, it becomes almost impossible to prove that it wasn't because of a person's. You can neither hire nor fire people without taking into account the arrangement of their reproductive organs and what they do with them. The whole problem...
Surely it's not as bad on the coast yet.
Which coast are we talking
This
about?
coast.
This coast, I don't know about Vancouver. You just have these other problems with human rights. You have restaurants being closed up because they're called Honk is Heaven or something, don't you?
Yeah, crazy. And we also have an incredible prostitution problem, which some people seem to be campaigning for.
Well, I don't know what the problem is with prostitutes.
It's a pest.
I mean,
it's unseemly.
but don't they stick
disgusting.
to their own habitat?
No.
Because I spent a long time in Vancouver. I was out here a few months ago, and I went looking for the Vancouver prostitutes. And I went looking for them not in the areas where they were supposed to be, but on the streets late at night. And I was with a group, actually, of Toronto criminal lawyers who showed a rather unnatural interest, I thought, in trying to find potential
At least
clients.
they weren't judges.
And we couldn't find them. I find that this
Must have been a wet night in the winter.
was actually a warm night in the summer.
Well, they'd already been booked up by all the tourists. Webster and Barbara Emile after the break. I suppose we should take some phone calls to Barbara Emile, so you might put up the number sometime or another. We've only got 15 minutes, less commercials, but interesting. Let's be a little lighter. It is a confessional, this book, you know, because you tell the story, and I don't want you to tell it now, of an abortion, your own abortion, and you're against abortion now that you've grown up. Is that right?
I was against it at the time, Jack. I just had another one of those pragmatic decisions based on what was expedient for me.
How old were you?
I guess I was about 24.
It was a kitchen table abortion?
It was a back room one, complete with, as I describe in the book, the black rubber apron, actually the naked light bulb. It was a fairly hideous experience, yes.
Wouldn't do it again.
No, the gods have been cruel to me, or the gods are probably being correct. Now that I want a child, it is very difficult to have one.
Isn't that funny?
I think there is a certain natural justice in the world that gets around to you in the end.
You are Jewish.
Yes.
You called yourself a wandering Jew earlier on.
Yes.
But you haven't done that much wandering, just wandering in Canada, apart from your reportorial travels.
I've done some wandering intellectually. And I suppose that's the sense that I mean it. I mean, when you go from the far left, when you go from communism to classic liberalism, you wander in that sense.
Were you a commie at one time?
I was never a card-carrying member. I was certainly at many communist gatherings, and I certainly believed in Marxism. I really thought it was going to provide heaven on earth.
Justice.
Justice.
Equality.
Decent. Well, you know, the whole thing, you use all these words to mask the most hideous of causes. It's the Jane Fonda syndrome. We talk about all the good things in life, and we say it with gleaming eyes.
See how they didn't switch after the Vietnam War, and how the North Vietnamese very cleverly dumped their problems in Cambodia and North America?
But the North Vietnamese told Miss Fonda, and indeed told the world, what they intended to do with Vietnam during the 60s. They made no secret of their plans for population redistribution, as they called it. There were even signs that the Greater Vietnamese Empire, i.e. the invasion of Cambodia, was going on. They made no secret of it. That is why those of us who were against the Vietnam War were anti-North Vietnam. We found that it was possible to say, listen, we really wish the United States wasn't there.
You have a couple of funny stories in it. Tell me the circumstances about Jane Fonda in this country.
Well, I mentioned in the book that I was having breakfast with Miss Fonda in New York. At the time, I was living with a gentleman who was a film director, and he was interviewing Miss Fonda for a part in a movie script, and I was in the kitchen squeezing the fresh orange juice and being ever so domestic, a role into which I do not slip easily. And Miss Fonda was in the front room talking about the totalitarian Canada. And it was just after the War Measures Act, and I explained, my boyfriend knew absolutely nothing about politics, he only knew about actors, and he called out to me, is Canada going totalitarian? And I didn't know whether it was or wasn't, but I tended to feel that we should wait and see. Bombs had gone off in Montreal. I didn't know what the War Measures Act was. And so I made some vague remarks about it. And Jane Fonda remarked that she had a headache. All this business about Trudeau and the totalitarianism and creeping fascism was getting to her. So I went trotting off to the bathroom, and I came back with a bottle of 222s with codeine in them. I gave her 2 tablets, a cup of coffee, and 10 minutes later, a serene Miss Fonda said to me, "What was in those tablets?" And I said, "Codeine, Miss Fonda, and you can get them over the counter in Canada." And that was ever so good, because she was going off to Montreal to make a speech, and while she was there, she picked up 3 bottles or whatever of 222s and came back to America, and lo and behold, at the airport they searched her baggage, and codeine in US is a controlled substance, so Miss Fonda was delayed for importing drugs over the border. And I say it now, and I said it in the book, and I've received a lot of flack for this, but a warm glow filled me when I heard that Miss Fonda had been detained at the airport because I had told her to buy C2s or 222s. A warm glow because, you see, the woman, in fact, splendid actress that she is, was advocating the cause of murderers and continues to advocate the cause of murderers and will not repent, and millions of people lie dead and lie without homes while dear Miss Fonda goes on the road advocating their cause.
Barbara Amiel, author of Confessions. After the break. No bloody way. Give me a one-word opinion on the human rights phenomenon which sweeps across this country with regularity each and every hysterical day.
3, lethal and selfish.
Thank you. Go ahead to Barbara Amiel.
You just took the wind out of my sails. That's what I was going to ask Barbara. By the way, you're a breath of fresh air besides being lovely.
Thank you very much.
And enjoy you immensely. In fact, I'm going out to purchase your book. One of the things that really bothers me as a Canadian is this Civil Rights Union and this BC Rights or BC Human Rights Commissions. They scare the hell out of me because they're encroaching upon the freedoms of the people.
Yep, I talk about them in the book as the thought police, and I'm afraid that's what it is. They use a terrific phrase, human rights, but in fact what they're doing is denying you human rights, and I think it's lethal.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Miss Amiel. I was very, very surprised to hear you say that you were visiting Vancouver several months ago, and it was a warm evening. I was just wondering if that's this year or last year.
It was this year. I think it was in June, and it was quite lovely.
Oh, it was. Oh, that's nice. Coming from Toronto, of course, you probably thought it was warm.
Is that your contribution to the debate, ma'am?
No, it isn't.
What's your point?
It's about the prostitution
Yes.
thing. Your article in Maclean's magazine,
Yes.
I burst into flames. And I wrote a letter to you, then I decided against it. But I'm glad you're here because I want to mention the fact that I'm a citizen. I'm also one of the victimized residents in West End of these people. We live in an apartment block. It's not Georgia Street, it's Jervis Street, off Davie. We have at least 6 prostitutes outside our apartment window every night. Now, if you would like to know this, I'd like to invite you up to our apartment.
What?
I'll give you a front seat, and you can have a look at them. Then you'll be able to see that we do have prostitutes.
What are the problems that they cause you?
Traffic, the voyeurs, the drunken men until 4 o'clock in the morning, going by, squealing their wheels.
Fair enough. Now, would you agree? Fair enough. That's a problem. But would you agree to legalizing it and removing them to an area of the city
where definitely. And I'm not against prostitution. Neither am I against motherhood.
Well, I actually as I said in the article, have an innate dislike of prostitution. But
No,
what
I noticed that.
What I suggested was, in fact, that if our ministers really cared about relieving the kind of problem, the legitimate problem that you're talking about, they would legalize it and put it in an area of the city where they wouldn't
You're
bother
also
you.
going to legalize 15-year-old drag queens, 16-year-old transvestites,
That's called
and all
an
the rest of them.
argument.
It's not an ad hominem argument. What we want in a civilized society, we certainly don't want a red light district and buying stock, as you do in West Germany, in a whorehouse of some kind. We're well aware that prostitution exists. A moment, please. We must have it under some form of social control, and there's a perfectly simple way to do it. You bring back straight soliciting, the police nab them from time to time, put them in jail, check them for VD, then they go out and they come back and pay the lawyers with a collection of $2 or $5 or $10 bills.
But you don't solve this lady's problems.
Yes, we do. We take them off the street on every occasion for simple soliciting. We harass them within the law nicely. We don't try and ban prostitution, but we don't want the public relations firm setting up in Vancouver or preferably in Toronto saying, you want to be a first-class hooker? I got the very house for you in the city of Vancouver, where they have a beautiful modern red light district, where you'll have your medical examinations every day, where you'll make enough money to retire in your RRSPs at 55 or 25, because people like myself, squares and horrible though we are, have a moral and rooted objection to encouraging the legalization of the debasement of the human body.
I do think it's the debasement of the human body, and very eloquently put,
Thank you,
but
ma'am.
beside the point.
You'd legalize it?
I'd legalize it. With much unhappiness, but I'd save that lady's problems, and in fact, I'd cope with the realities of the situation. Your problem, your cure is worse than the disease, because in the end, you will distort the law in your
No, I
cure.
won't. I'll make the law simply enforceable on a license fee basis without giving a public acknowledgement to the legalization of whorehouses. Let's call it what it is. And the disease in this town is endemic and rampant from these disgusting, unfortunate human beings,
Well,
male and female, on the streets.
If you're worried about disease, you will legalize it so you can license and check them up. Your suggestion is when you catch them after
Put
the
them
act.
through the mill. First time we've disagreed this morning. I'm astonished at your low moral attitude on this.
Well, of course, I am a creature that crawled out of the gutter.
No, you're not. You came from an affluent Jewish family. It
But I
said
went
so in
back into-
Confessions. Only for show and experience. You're not legitimate working class like me. Are we finished? A very good book, Barbara Amiel, Confessions. I enjoyed it thoroughly. You are, I don't think you're any more of a neo-fascist than I am. And you may take that any way you wish. Webster after break. Not a bad morning.
No, it was not a bad morning indeed.
What's this about another Liberal tomorrow morning?
Yes, on the treadmill of Liberals out of Ottawa, we have Don Johnston.
Treasury Board.
Tomorrow? Yeah.
And Yalden.
And Max Yalden.
And Alan Thick.
Yes.
Did he have a lisp or is his name Thick?
His name is Thick, and he's going to charm.
And he's very bright, isn't he? He's doing a
Apparently.
new show on BCTV. Webster, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. precisely.
Can we do both of them? Because he wants to.
Tonight, Confessions of Barbara Amiel of McLean. Good show. Tonight, the Confessions of Barbara Amiel of McLean's. Lively.